figure we want to look at now is working on triangles. Let's start off with one like this, kind of get an idea. We should also remember by now too, this is a right triangle, and we know that right triangle is going to measure 90 degrees. A triangle total measure is going to be 180. Just a little brief thing there. Now, with this one, it's going to be a little bit different. Now, we're going to do this was the easy one first. If the base of this one is, let's call this one 6, and this height, you can see it a little bit longer, we're going to call that 12. Now, the difference with your triangle is, we're going to call it, the formula is 1/2 base times height. Okay, 1/2 base times height. So if I take my base of 6, my height of 12, well, 6 times 12 is 72. But that just, it says half of it. That means now I have to take this 72 and divide it by 2, and I'll get 36. We'll call it the same thing, square inches. Remember, this has to be divided by 2. Now, let's go back and look just a minute and see if we can determine why we're going to do that. Most of us by now realize if I take a rectangle and if I do a diagonal line from this corner all the way over here, as best my drawing is, and y'all are familiar with that, if I take a diagonal line and cut this rectangle in half that way, what have I just formed? I have now formed 2 triangles. One here on top, and then another one underneath it. Okay? So basically all I've done is taken a rectangle, same thing with a square, could be either one. I've taken this rectangle and cut it in half into 2 different pieces, 2 separate pieces, but I've done it diagonally. That's what presents you with your triangle. And it will look something like this, and it will look something like this. That's with it split apart. We could do that with paper and pencil and scissors and cut it apart on a desktop and do some activities and see how that comes into play. Same way we would with the parallelogram a few minutes ago. This is why our formula looks like this. Because we've taken a rectangle that we're finding area of. Remember, rectangle was A equals base times height, length times width, same thing pretty much. Length times width. In this case, we've cut that rectangle into 2 pieces, so now I have to take 1/2 of base times height. That's where that formula comes from. Now let's look at one like this. You'll see several of them look something like this. Okay, that's a big long triangle here. I've got a base on this one. Let's call it 16. We don't know what we're looking at here. Remember our formula, A equals 1/2 base times height. And again, what you're likely to see is a dotted line going down the center like this. And besides that dotted line, you're likely to see, you'll see your number here. That's what's giving you the height of this triangle. You can't go by these 2 sides that are sloping. You must go by the straight line that goes from the base all the way up to the very top of that triangle. And if you do that, it tells us that this particular triangle here has a height of 8 inches. So if the height is 8 inches and our base is 16, we're simply going to take 16, multiply that times 8, we get 128. But remember, since this is a triangle and not a rectangle, we now have to divide that by 2. In that case, we'll get 64 is our, and don't forget to put, I didn't put the label on like I should have. So this one would have a 64 for this particular triangle here. Now, let's look at one more right quick before we stop for today, and then you'll have some opportunity to work some on your own. if I've got this parallelogram, and now keep in mind my drawing is not like it should be. We'll do the best we can here. Let's say this one has a base of 8.2. Your dotted line right here has, let's call this one 4.5. Okay. Remember what we said we were going to do with this one. We can fill this in back down here and get rid of this part. We're back to a rectangle. And I'm simply putting this back up so we can take one more look at decimal numbers. 4.5 and 8.2. Now multiply through. Now get an answer of 3690. In this case, don't forget, you have to go back. Find your decimal, count places. Find your decimal, count places. That gives me 2 decimal places in that problem. Again, I go to my answer, and I back up 2 spaces, and I put that right here. So the area of that parallelogram will be 36.90 square inches or inches squared. Be sure that you look at these two and notice either one of those labels will be acceptable. Whichever way you choose, write out square inches or the inches with your exponent of 2 right beside it. Either one would be acceptable. Now, so very quickly wrapping up here, let's go back and look. My formula for a rectangle or a 4-sided figure is going to be length times width. Okay. If I've got a triangle, I'm going to have 1/2 base times height. If I'm dealing with a parallelogram, it's simply going to be called base times height. Because again, a rectangle and a parallelogram, basically the same thing. One's just leaning over, the other one is not. And don't forget the triangle, because your triangle is simply half of a rectangle. Then that's why we do the 1/2 here in base times height. Keep in mind, all that we've done with this lesson today is just do a brief introduction. This leads you into polygons and doing area, a little bit of perimeter. Most of the perimeter you've already done last year, but you'll see a little bit more of that this year. But these are your basic formulas for finding area of these 3. Rectangle, triangle, parallelogram, and we'll be working on that some more in the next few days and taking time in class to get some more practice done with that. Good luck.